Hello and namaste. Dear friends, welcome to the 19th session of She and Rights, which is being held ahead of the International Women's Day and the 70th session of the UN Commission on Status of Women, or CSW70, as well as during the ongoing Intergovernmental 13th Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, or APFSD as we call it, being held in Thailand. This session would also feature highlights from few important meetings held this month, including APFSD People's Forum, organized by Asia Pacific Regional Civil Society Engagement Mechanism, and the first Intergovernmental Working Group, or IGWG, meeting to draw a legally binding instrument for promotion and protection of the rights of older persons, where I was part of those with lived experience and also on behalf of CNS and Development Justice for Older Persons campaign, or DJ for OP as we call it. This session also marks the 20th anniversary of the Universal Periodic Review. This session is together hosted by Women's Rights Caucus convened by Fòs Feminista, Global Center for Health Diplomacy and Inclusion, CSW70, Women Deliver Conference 2026, International Planned Parenthood Federation, IPPF, Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women, ARROW, Asia Pacific Media Alliance for Health, Gender and Development Justice, APCAT Media, Development Justice for Older Persons, DJ for OP, and CNS. Journalists reporting on issues raised by She and Rights sessions are welcome to apply for the third edition of She and Rights Media Awards 2026. Hybrid award ceremony would be held around Women Deliver Conference 2026, and the link to apply is given in the chat box. A few quick housekeeping announcements before we begin. Participants can please type in their questions and comments in the chat box even as the speakers present. We will take up as many relevant questions as time permits after all the speakers have presented. Dear friends, as we all know, 58 months are left for all governments to ensure that they deliver on all the 17 SDGs, including SDG 3 on human right to health and SDG 5 on gender equality. The legally binding treaty CEDAW and a host of other commitments, declarations, agreements also warrant that gender equality must be ensured where no one is left behind. But progress is abysmal. We cannot accept 0.2% annual decline in gender-based violence since last 26 years. In 2026, we are seeing the sad jolt to women's rights and human rights when countries like Afghanistan are legitimizing domestic violence by allowing it if bones are not broken. And if they are not broken, it is okay to beat the wife as per Afghanistan. Should we be grateful that our bones will not be broken? Or should we be outraged that why women are not deciding for themselves what they want? Women want to end all forms of violence against them, including emotional violence. We want to live with rights and dignity and allow the same for all gender diverse peoples everywhere. Also, when we speak of gender equality and human rights, where no one is left behind, we cannot forget older persons. Governments need to ensure that people of all age groups, young or old, are fully able to benefit from gender justice, health justice, social justice, economic justice, climate justice. Without any further ado, let us open today's session with two short videos from Women Deliver Conference 2026, of which CNS is an official media partner, and some of the She and Rights co-hosts like IPPF, ARROW, and CSW70 are also partners of Women Deliver Conference 2026. So let us see the videos.
It's more important than ever that we have these global spaces that allow us to create and craft compelling and inspiring narratives. Holding Women Deliver 2026 in the Pacific region is incredibly important. It's a region that doesn't often get a platform, and it's a region that's facing a number of different challenges, particularly the climate crisis. Being able to hear their issues and priorities is incredibly important.
I now invite Dr. Virginia Kamova, Regional and Country Engagement Manager, Global Center for Health Diplomacy and Inclusion. Welcome, Virginia. We are really keen to hear and learn from you about the Health and Rights Observatory. Over to you, Virginia.
Friends, you're welcome to
Yes, Virginia, are you there? All right. While we wait for Virginia to present, I invite Shiphrah Belonguel, a feminist activist and writer-researcher from the Philippines and Global Advocacy Officer at Fòs Feminista. Over to you, Shiphrah. The floor is yours now.
Hi, Shobha.
Hi.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to speak to two things. First, our priorities as a Women's Rights Caucus for engaging the 70th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. And then also speak to kind of the civil society challenges for civil society participation for engaging. Yeah. So bear with me,
Yeah.
please. In terms of our priorities, I think in recognition of the theme, which is access to justice, access is the operative word. This is why we are fighting for strong language on multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination that impact access to justice, and making sure that we retain language that ensures this for women and girls in all their diversity. We are fighting for sexual and reproductive health and rights and bodily autonomy as central to access to justice. When women cannot make decisions about their bodies, sexuality, and reproduction free from coercion and violence, especially when they are denied the services they need to exercise those decisions, those are human rights violations that too often become justice failures. We are also making sure to emphasize sexual and gender-based violence, as this encompasses harmful acts rooted in structural gender inequalities and power imbalances. These are systemic injustices that justice systems must be equipped to confront. We also want to ensure access to justice and enforceable remedies in the world of work. So in accordance to labor law, labor inspection, collective bargaining and redress laws, making sure outcomes reflect CSW and International Labor Organization standards, including the right to organize, bargain collectively, as well as address violence and harassment in the world of work, ensure social protection, transition from informal to formal work, and integrated care systems. Lastly, in the pursuit of justice, civil society organizations are often the first and only trusted actors who name human rights violations and demand accountability. In communities where formal justice systems are accessible, underfunded, or hostile, CSOs, legal aid clinics, women human rights defenders, and feminist groups fill the gap. Despite this, strategic litigation and foreign agent legislation are increasingly weaponized against women human rights defenders and feminist organizations globally. So explicit language is needed to recognize the contributions of civil society actors and remedy the challenges that they experience. And this is also particularly disproportionately carried by women human rights defenders. Earlier, I said that the operative word for the theme is access, and I think it's ironic because so many civil society actors are increasingly challenged to access the CSW space itself. In this regard, I would like to read a statement from the Women's Rights Caucus, an informal coalition of over 800 organizations and advocates engaging the CSW annually. So it's co-convened by Fòs Feminista, Outright International, Young Feminist Caucus, the Asia Pacific Forum for Women, Law and Development, and Femnet. So, okay. So this is our statement. As we near the 70th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, the Women's Rights Caucus raises urgent concerns about shrinking civic space and escalating barriers to civil society participation. Particularly for feminists, women's rights, LGBTQIA+ activists, and human rights defenders from the Global South, and young women and girls in all their diversity who are systematically excluded by rising authoritarianism, securitized policies, extensive surveillance, and entrenched global power structures. These challenges come at a critical moment. Just months ago, member states adopted a resolution on CSW revitalization that was intended to strengthen the Commission's mandate and to expand civil society participation and reinforce the role of the Commission as a central normative space for advancing gender equality, and particularly the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. Yet entrenched structural inequities and rising nationalist, supremacist, and neoliberal agendas threaten to undermine these reforms. This has led to the silencing of rights defenders, particularly in the Global South, where gains on women's leadership, autonomy, and economic empowerment were beginning to take hold. Global South organizations already face restrictive visa regimes and entrenched bureaucratic hurdles. Now they are further constrained by recently expanded U.S. travel and visa restrictions, which include partial to full bans affecting dozens of countries and excessive visa bond requirements for citizens up to 38 countries. These measures are part of a broader strategy of exclusion that disproportionately silences feminists, LGBTQIA activists, grassroots advocates, and human rights defenders from the Global South. For those who are able to travel, serious concerns remain around safety and security, including racial profiling, gender-based discrimination, surveillance, escalating border violence and harassment while moving through the streets, particularly for human rights defenders, sex worker rights advocates, people of diverse OGSC, and racialized communities, in the context of increasingly hostile situation for marginalized populations and dissenting voices in the host country. At the same time, anti-rights actors continue to expand their presence and influence within the UN space, often facing none of the barriers imposed on feminist civil society. This growing imbalance actively reinforces the inequitable power dynamics and systemic barriers, undermining accountability and threatening the integrity of policy spaces, privileging anti-rights agendas over protection and promotion of human rights. These external issues are compounded by internal threats, ongoing discussions around UN80 reforms, serious concerns around the future of the UN's gender equality architecture. Without explicit safeguards, reforms risk depoliticizing gender equality and deliberately sidelining human rights defenders and feminist movements. Importantly, the revitalization outcome also points towards new opportunities, including regional rotation of CSW sessions and strengthening of regional follow-up and implementation processes. In a context where travel to the default host country is increasingly unequal, expensive, and unsafe, participation becomes a privilege. These realities make these measures essential to ensure that CSW remains accessible, representative, and accountable. So, as we look towards CSW70, the Women's Rights Caucus is unequivocal. Civil society participation is foundational to the legitimacy and effectiveness of CSW. Safety, access, and dignity for feminist advocates, particularly from the Global South, and human rights defenders across issue areas must be guaranteed and defended. Gender equality mandates must be strengthened, not hollowed out or sidelined under the guise of reform, and any reform must be accountable to and shaped by lived reality and priorities of feminist advocates and human rights defenders. So feminist movements, human rights defenders will continue to organize, resist, and hold power to account inside and outside UN spaces. Member states, UN leadership, and the CSW Bureau must act now to ensure that CSW70 does not become a symbol of exclusion, but a platform for amplifying the leadership of those most affected by persistent gender injustice and systemic inequalities. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiphrah. And we really agree with you on what you have said regarding civil society participation and what the CSW needs to do. And thanks to Fòs Feminista and Women Rights Caucus, I would like to share with our participants that our next UN Rights session on 10th March will focus on CSW70 outcomes. Our next speaker is Professor Emerita Dr. Rashidah Shuib, President REHAK, that is Reproductive Health Association of Kelantan. Rashidah will share her insights on aging with rights in the context of SRHR and gender equality and broader development justice. Welcome, Rashidah. The floor is yours now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Fine. But there is an echo, yeah?
Yes, there is an echo. Yes.
All right. I would like to share a screen, but I don't know. Let me get a screen up. Yeah. Okay.
But the echo is still there, Rashidah.
Yeah, but what do I do?
Must be at your end only, something with the internet or some problem.
I don't know what it is, but let me then, yeah, switch off the phone. I've switched it off.
No, it is still there.
It's still echo. I wonder what. So what shall I?
Okay, you continue. We'll manage.
Okay. All right. Thank you for inviting me, Shobha. And also thank you to Arrow, because Arrow has been the one who
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, but something come up here and it's blocking my presentation.
We can't see your screen as yet.
Yes. I don't understand this.
We cannot see your screen.
You cannot see my face, neither can you see my...
No, we can see your face. We can see your face.
You cannot see my slide.
No, we can't see your slide.
Can you see my slide now? On the
No.
share?
No.
Oh, you can't? Okay. Let's try again. You can't, no? How do I share this?
You must be having the share screen option there. You click on the share screen option on your computer.
I am already sharing it.
Yes, now we can see it.
Okay. Basically, I just would like to give a brief intro and the context of the reality of really all of us aging and that the world is aging. And then I will give the fact that there are multiple perspectives of aging actually maybe has been ignored by policy decision makers. And I think all of us work as activists and as with NGOs ought to be sensitive and aware of this multiple perspective of aging, which range from individual or communal perspectives and also government. For me, I'm taking the stand actually as one who is already in the group of aging, that aging is a person and a political matter. It's personal because it impacts individual personally at the ground level, depending on where the person is in the society and what kind of resources that individual has in terms of accessibility or even whether the resources are available to be accessed. It's political because we must talk about rights, because right itself carries with it power. And people who are vulnerable, and that includes older people, often do not have that kind of power that is needed to access certain resources. I will touch briefly aging as SRHR and why it matters, look at a link with development, and then perhaps put the question of what then? What do we do in ours as we go ahead? What happened to my? It doesn't want to move anymore, Shobha.
Yes.
I'm trying to make it move and it's not moving.
No,
Okay.
I do not know. It should be in presentation mode, Rashidah, if you can make it in presentation mode.
Yeah, it's okay. I think I'll just go ahead and
All
talk
right. All right.
rather than wasting time.
And Rashidah, is there any other device close to your laptop because
no.
of which the echo is coming?
Yeah, I don't know.
So-
I'm in my room.
Yes,
but
yes. So no other device you have.
phone.
Phone or no. Okay. Okay, then continue, please.
All right. Okay. I don't want to waste time, so let's
Yes,
go.
yes.
But the fact is that the world is aging. We know that from the World Population latest report in 2024, that the global, I mean, I have the figure on the first slide, but I can't see it now. The world is definitely going up with a pattern of a rise until it reaches about 2080, and then it's going to really go down. And that is going to happen in all countries, particularly in countries that are already facing aging issues and developed countries. Some countries will go there, but it will take its time because at the moment, these countries are also still have the fertility is still good in terms of replacement. Okay, in the fact that we have to remember is that many of these low and middle income countries are facing aging within a short frame of time, within just what, like the last 20 years, for example, in Malaysia, in my country, Malaysia, we see this happening not just in certain states, but in all states. So the change is rapid. And as the country is going through all this flux and negotiations economically, I don't know whether we will be, or the countries are ready really to face this aging phenomenon. Um, Developed countries, however, if you look, it took them what, almost 115 years to really age. So they have France, for example, or even Japan. So they have time to really set up certain infrastructures that they think would, I mean, they have time to think about it, they have time to plan about it, and they have time to implement it. But within a short time and in the mode of crisis all the time, and our countries are going through almost a very fluid change, some of them unexpected. So I think this is of a great concern to us. Um, in Malaysia, by 2050, I think we are going to have a certain type of population dynamics. In fact, in the whole in the region, I don't have any, Catherine. I don't have any device actually now. Just now, I've already switched off the phone, and yeah, I don't have any. Uh, I will I will continue. Uh, So, in terms of population dynamics, we have, of course, increased aging, a declining mortality, a declining fertility, and but we also have increased morbidity. So here we have to see and we have to understand and perhaps study how SRHR intersect with NCDs, which is with non-communicable diseases. And we don't have much data yet on this, but the intersectionality perspective must come into the kind of work of researchers and those who are trying to collect data, because data is actually such a precious commodity that we don't have. And I think NGOs, CSOs, if they want to really advocate, they have to advocate with data. They have to advocate with evidence. Um, in certain countries, and again, I have to turn to my country, where we are a multi-ethnic country. You are going to find varying aging index. Certain ethnic groups age faster, living longer. For example, because we have the main groups of Bumiputra, Indians, Chinese, you find there is a varying aging index here. The Chinese, for example, is 55%, the Indians 31.4%, while the Bumiputra is about 22.8%. So what does it mean when countries have this kind of varying aging index? It means that our interventions must understand the nuances and therefore must plan for much more specific interventions for certain groups. We can no longer have actually just a general, we can have a general policy, but we cannot have just one type of program that we think will fit all the aging groups in the country. So this is a challenge for countries that have this kind of multi-ethnic society. So what does it mean for us then, aging with rights? Aging with rights means we have to recognize that our geopolitics, the global, the regional, the national, keep changing. And the way I understand it, I think this changing is going to be a constant pattern in our lives in the next future and the kind of work we do. We understand now the impact of USA's withdrawal on the work and what it means, I think, for already already vulnerable groups like the aging group. We have also changing society. We have changing structures, family structures. I have not read the various changing family structures in ASEAN, just ASEAN countries, Cambodia, Malaysia, Myanmar, Singapore, Thailand, Brunei, etc. But it is very obvious when the Department of Statistics in Malaysia released just last year, or about 2 years ago, how family structure is really changing. because of urbanization, because of rural to urban migration for jobs, so that when you do census and define family as those who congregate and use one kitchen, you're going to find that kitchen being used by 4 or 5 people sharing them who are not even related to each other. And yet they have to care for each other in one way or the other because they share not just the kitchen but also the house, and that becomes their home. Um, then of course those who are left behind then have to depend on whatever structure is left for them. In the village, for example, sorry Radhika, I just cannot do anything anymore, so I have to proceed. In the village, because the young who have left, they have left the aged in the villages. So we have a situation where people who are old as I am in the 70s, having who also sometimes need care, have to care for those who are living beyond 70s and 80s. So this is a challenge that we are facing now. It is both actually an SRHR challenge because people who are already in the 60s or 70s have SRHR problems, but they have to take care of those who are in the 80s who may also have SRHR problems, sexual reproductive health problems. The other component I mentioned earlier is that this multiple perspective of aging is very important. If the health, for example, is looking only at health when it plans its policies, and it forgets that there are those who are also who we also need to talk about the societal part, the social, the social inclusion part. And then there are those who come in just with economic perspectives, and they come up with economic policies that actually ignore the old, or the old have to be involved if they were before working, getting good pay. Of course, they're now retired, getting whatever the retirement scheme says, much lower, of course, than what they gained before. And then they may end up also doing jobs which are much, much lower than their qualification. So you can, from the economic perspectives, be very happy with that because you have developed policy where the old can work, but they work in situations where it may have no dignity for them, no respect for them. So I think, again, we have to really think about this. And of course, we have to think about, as I say, the personal is political. We have to understand the narratives at the individual level of those who are undergoing the aging process, or they are already in the aging group, in the aged group. Do we have data on this? As from what I know from the work that I've done, it is very, very difficult to get data. Simply because data, I think, are not available, and the voices of the older persons are often not tapped. We know that aging is not just a biological problem. Of course, biology works in such a way, nature works in such a way so that some cells just become old and no longer function and affects us, and so we become old. But the social construct part of aging, I think, is very important to understand. The gendered dimensions of aging. Simple things like we know in many countries developed and also low middle income countries, we have women outliving men by almost 4.8 to 5 years. And this is going to be a pattern in the coming years. And men having a shorter lifespan also have impact on the women as well as men. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, are we living longer and be happier about it? Are we living healthy? Are we healthier, or can we just maintain our health? So living longer actually in many conditions really is not may not be a blessing. Uh, from the small case studies that I've done, really in on the ground in the villages, supported by work, by funding from ERO and EU, I was preparing as I prepared the report for SCPD plus 30. The small case studies show that older women in the rural areas and in the urban areas in the state of where I am remain in the productive role. The productive role itself may change from the formal sector to the informal sector, but they work. So they continue working. One, because, well, it can be, they said, well, I just want to be active, which is fine. It's a choice. Some have to work. They have no choice. They have to work because they have to continue supporting their families or their grandchildren. So they remain in that role. And one of them described it as a never ending story. And I think we need to understand this. And I don't know whether economists have gone that far down to the ground to really understand what is really going on. Access to resources, of course, we know has remained unequal. I can talk about it personally. I have a bilateral knee replacement, which costs money. I have a spine that collapsed, lumbar spines that collapse, and that needs money. But because I have access to resources, and because I am a professor at the university where there is a teaching hospital, uh, and my grade allows me certain privileges. So I have that privileges to repair my knees and to repair my back and still be here with you all. But I also know deep in the village, women with my problem who can no longer really walk or go and tap rubber, for example, have no access to this kind of technology simply because they just cannot pay, and I don't think the government can pay for them. So this is something that actually bothers me personally, because I think gender equity, not just equality, gender equity has remained as it is. It's not really changed much for the last since ICPD 1994. Some have changed, but certain things have not changed. And of course, the women's unique biology places us in a very precarious, sometimes, a situation. One, because the biology itself intersects with the social construct of what society views women as. And then women's biology, of course, gives us all kind of health conditions that actually can be really a challenge for women and ignored. And this happens because perhaps in the early years of meeting health or seeking health information or intervention from health carers, they were not looking at that person from a life course perspective. I think this is not just about aging with rights. Aging with rights also means you must adopt the life course perspective. Between people who deal with adolescents must understand what are the implications of their health and how these would impact them when they grow old, when we become old. So the life course perspective is indeed very, very important. So we have problem of, I've seen this, I've collected a few of this data already from the case study, and they are talking about urinary incontinence, uterine prolapse. They're talking about menopause with health implications and how they went through with it, because they didn't understand much about menopause. They thought it was natural, and that was natural for them to suffer the consequences of menopause. And yet, you can actually have treatment, whether you want to go for a medical treatment or a non-medical treatment. But there are resources in that these women should have access to. And of course, menopause comes with it with various health complications. For example, the cardiovascular problems, there is osteoporosis, definitely. And in my condition, personally, it is about osteoporosis, which I think has a link with how I grew up, in the village, with no access to certain food, actually, or no access to activities that help to develop the bones. Then, of course, mental health is a problem. And they talk about depression a lot. In the case studies, they talk about how they are depressed because sometimes they feel trapped in the reproductive role that never stop. But they can also have mental health because of isolation. Remember, the young move to the urban areas, seeking for jobs, and so sometimes it is isolation, and people are living alone more also in the villages. And of course, I am not going to go into detail about reproductive cancers. That we have the breast cancers, cancer of the cervix, and so on. Like the cancer of the cervix, you can actually detect it very early if you have um, preventive screening programs, um, and whether women are willing to access this screening program. Uh, some of them talk about shame, they talk about cost, they talk about the need for even simple need for transport, for example, that they don't have. So why should they give that a priority if they have all these problems? But then the biological construct is also the biological and social construct also affects men in different ways. So I saw this line that says, "Men age like wine." And I said to myself, "Do they really?" I mean, this is a big question. Or do men actually age like women? And but then we become not wine, but we become sour vinegar. Because sour vinegar we can still use it in cooking, but not when it is us. So men too suffer from physiological and hormonal impacts. For example, they have this increased abdominal fat, they reduce muscle, they reduced muscle means sarcopenia. That means the legs are no longer strong. They have lower bone density, but they also suffer from loneliness and social isolation because they've reduced roles, or the roles changed dramatically from position of power to position of minimal power if they have any left. Uh, and then they have issue of prostate cancer, which is rather common in men. And I think what is also and of course these are also they also have SRH problem as well. And what is sad is that actually men, at least from literature, have shown that the health-seeking behavior uh, is not positive, and many of them are reluctant to seek healthcare. And I'm bringing this up because I think in many countries, the setup of the healthcare system actually focuses on those in the years of reproductive years of 14, say, to 49. So the 50s onwards do not rarely have special programs for them. And we need to really advocate for this. Um, so in short, aging matters to development because health is development. Health is critical, fundamental to development. We knew that already. We learned from the HIV/AIDS, and we learned from the COVID-19 epidemic a few years ago, and how it impacts the development of countries, and how businesses close, for example. So we cannot say to ourselves, people cannot say that aging, and particularly SRHR, is not has no bearing on development. And I would like to sort of quote. Um, I saw a video, a YouTube of Gita Sen. Of course, who's a famous activist, has been doing a lot of work in terms of development and feminist work. If you're looking at development from the feminist perspective, in the recent CPD 58, for example, Sen spoke eloquently, and I would like to quote her. She says, tension between development and SRHR has always been there, right from 1994, actually. One side arguing that actually we do need SRHR because they see this as a concept that flows in from the north. And still this argument still goes on 30 years after ICPD. And she continues saying, but we cannot separate SRHR because SRHR without the right to development. And we cannot have development without bodily autonomy. And I think this is a quote that is really strong to argue that SRHR should be actually as part of the center of development as government begins to think about policy and intervention. So given that health is fundamental to development, SRHR therefore is fundamental to development, and we can see this link from previous international meetings, bringing in women from the north and the south. We saw that happening in ICPD in 1994, and how the paradigm shift about health should take the life course perspective. It should really bring in the reproductive health and later sexual health into the whole issue of women's health as well. And now we have the SDGs, the SDG 3 and the SDG 5. Actually, if the review that has been done will show us that there is a gap in meeting the goals of SDG 3 and SDG 5 in the and its implications on the vulnerable groups, the disabled, but also the migrant workers, as well as the older persons here, and particularly the older women because of the gender construct. So what then? So where do we go from here? Well, at the moment, SRH to me is invisible. And of course, the H, which the R, the other R that should be there, we should frame the work that we do in SRH is also invisible. I've never seen, I think, a policy in my own country where gender analysis is really being done or being incorporated into the thinking. I mean, there's effort, of course, but not yet. I mean, we need to really work more on this. So, definitely, I would like to say that SRHR of older persons are invisible, but more so SRHR of older women and other vulnerable groups in our country. And our countries remain invisible. Our work is still far. We need to work so that these issues become visible in policies and programs. And funders, I think, should take note. Policies and programs, I think, must not sort of leave this group behind, because we some sort of morally, ethically, we made a promise of SDG 5 or the whole SDGs as leaving no one behind. So we cannot leave certain groups behind, particularly not older persons. I, as an old person, I do not want to be left behind. I want to be part and parcel of the society. So the question that I'm asked the group, and that's what I'm going to leave behind, is what then for us? How can media at the global, regional, national level play their roles to make these issues visible, and also so that we can use it to advocate in, at various levels? How do we collect data which are still not collected, and if they are collected, they are not disaggregated. So without disaggregation, and we have been talking about this for many, many years. Yes, we do talk about universal healthcare, but at the moment, I question whether universal healthcare and those implementing it are trained with the right perspective to implement and operationalize universal healthcare. So to me, these are two very important issues. And as someone who works, I'm retired, I still work. I sometimes work and go to the university on the health campus. I feel very strongly, and my sadness is because I've not been able to really convince for the various health schools to really bring in the right perspective in the way we want it. They do talk about it from the ethics viewpoint, but more than that, the right perspective that we think and that is needed to train our medical doctors and our nurses. And then there's also the life course perspective that should be brought in. So that I would like to end. So I think that's what I think, but I leave it to the group to think what then and how do we move forward. So thank you again, Shobha, for inviting me. And sorry
Thank,
about
no, that is okay. We really loved listening to you, Rashidah. And you and me have a lot in common. I am also in the middle of 70s. I have also had a bilateral knee transplant.
yeah.
And still, I think it is time to fight for our rights and to age with dignity. Thanks for bringing in so many different perspectives of aging with rights, particularly in the case of women, because it becomes the problem becomes far more compounded. And I loved your comparison of wine versus sour vinegar. We have to upturn that rather. Thank you very much, Rashidah. And let us now listen to Sai Jyothirmai Racherla, Deputy Executive Director, Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women, that is ARROW. Sai will share with us the main takeaways from the 13th session of Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development being held in Thailand. Let us listen to what she has to say.
Good day to everyone, and we are happy to report to you on the Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development and share with you some of the key discussions that are taking place at this forum, which is currently happening. Before I get started, I would also want to talk about the context that we are living in. And this context of the world is rapidly changing. The world is not the same anymore. There are dramatic events that are taking place that we haven't seen for a century. So just to give you a glimpse of how the world is actually changing, on the economic front, we see trade happening. Trade is always good for people and for countries, but the way trades are taking place at this point in time is where like high tariffs are being levied upon countries, especially in the global south, and this is impacting the world's economy and the people in the global south. The other aspect that we also need to look at is artificial intelligence, and the impact of artificial intelligence is also changing the world like never before. One aspect is the ethical use of this artificial intelligence, but also there are impacts in terms of extraction of rare earth minerals, which actually are required for making these chips and technology gadgets required for AI. And then we have wars and conflicts on a rise, be it the Ukraine war, it is ongoing, the chaos around Greenland, active conflicts in the Asia-Pacific region, EU-US relationships, and then all these are focusing then on countries putting their resources on security and their internal domestic trade. And then especially this is impacting the donor countries to, put out the aid and as a result of which countries are in cracks in the global south where the ODA is not being fulfilled. In addition to this, we also have the UNAT reforms taking place, and then much of the discussions are still under the wraps. But again, how will multilateralism pan out in the future is again a big question. What we have all benefited is multilateralism was a connect between the countries, and we now have to see how this UNAT reforms is going to, have an impact on the world. So in the midst of all these contextual dramatic events, the follow-up and review of the Asia-Pacific Forum. This is basically the follow-up and review to the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development at the regional level, which is called the APFSD, which takes place annually and ahead of the high-level political forum sometime in July in New York. And this year, it is ongoing at this point in time from the 24th to the 27th of February. And what happens each year is there are certain goals that will be reviewed, the Sustainable Development Goals. And this year, the review of SDG 6 on water and sanitation, SDG 7 on clean energy, SDG 9 on industry, innovation, infrastructure, SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities, and SDG 17 on partnerships. So these are the 5 goals which are being reviewed, along with a thematic overview of transformation, innovation, equitability, and cooperation. So I will just present to you some slides that focus on what is exactly happening also in regards to these goals. So from the reports that have been published by UNESCAP, we see that the environmental dimensions, so all the environment-related goals are actually negatively impacting not only the environment, but also the all other SDGs, whether it is the SDG on poverty, or whether it is the SDG on trade. So these are all being impacted, which actually says that we have to actually put environmental sustainability at the center of our work. And the other aspect that is also coming out from all these reports is that the Goal 5 on gender equality and Goal 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions, there is a lot of data scarcity on this. And these goals are basically the goals which actually tell us about marginalization and how we are addressing issues of marginalization and leaving no one behind. And an overview in this region is also pointing out to the fact that all goals under review 9, 11, and 17, but across all from the 1 to 17 goals, they are all off track in the region. Just coming to SDG 6 on water and sanitation, there is a need to accelerate progress on all the targets in this goal, whether it is access to safe drinking water, water quality, sanitation and hygiene, water use efficiency. What we also see is access to water and sanitation is a key enabler. And it is an enabler to realizing SDG 11, which is on sustainable cities and communities, but also SDG 9, which is on infrastructure, because we know we need water for everything. And that's the reason why the goal on water has to be realized. So then it has an impact on people, but also on the infrastructure and industry aspects. So basically, we are off track and we need to accelerate progress on SDG 6. Coming to SDG 7, and this is on clean energy, and progress on this is also needs to be accelerated. Some of the highlights in regards to this goal are that the progress on the share of renewable energy is on a reversal, with the region significantly reliant on fossil fuels. So we are continuing to rely on fossil fuels, and then a lot of work needs to be done around renewable energy. Gender inequalities in energy access, for example, lack of safe cooking oil options, are putting women and girls at risks of illnesses due to indoor house pollution. SDG 7 targets and indicators, they are inherently gender blind, because when you talk about energy infrastructure, the aspect of human dimensions do not really come in. And when then human dimensions don't come in, women and girls just miss out. So overall, we do see that SDG 7 is gender blind, resulting in poor gender responsive energy access policies, regulations, and programs. Coming to SDG 9, which is on industry, innovation, and infrastructure, we see that, again, here it is off track and accelerated progress is required to achieve this goal in the region. What is also important is the access to finance for SME, small and medium enterprises. This should be critical. And this is again off track. What is also important to note is that the progress on ICT and internet access, although we say that internet access has improved and ICT has improved, but when you look at the rural-urban divide, when you look at access of internet for vulnerable and marginalized groups, that is still an issue that needs to be addressed. So on this goal, it is urgent to assess the extractive and environmental impacts of digital technologies, infrastructure, and industry, because this again is very important, because when we are talking about environmental sustainability, the extraction of natural resources for technology is rampant, and this needs to be assessed in terms of environmental impact assessment. Then again, coming to SDG 11, which is on sustainable cities and communities, we know that the Asia-Pacific region actually hosts 54% of the world's urban population. And the world is rapidly urbanizing. So we are experiencing rapid urbanization. And again, this goal is off track and calls for urgent actions. When you also look at disaster risk management, given that the frequency of disasters in this region is very high, but at the same time, the disaster risk management policies and resilience to disasters, this trend is actually seeing a reversal with increasing number of people in the region affected by disasters. We constantly see in our news how floods and typhoons are so normal and so frequent that we do not have strategies that will enable us to look at to overcome these disasters in a more positive way. Safe and inclusive cities for women and girls, young people, and persons with disabilities. This is again a very far-fetched dream. Safety is an issue, and also accessibility for persons with disability in cities to public goods and public resources and public facilities is an issue. These are some of the way forwards. And at the same time, the APRSM, which is the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism, we have organized the People's Forum. So we had the Youth Forum first, and then we had the People's Forum. And this was held from the 22nd to the 23rd of February. And the People's Forum actually come up with a framework, which is called the Development Justice Framework, which focuses on redistribution, it focuses on environmental justice, it focuses on gender and social justice. And these are the frameworks that we need to start using as the alternative frameworks, and these alternative frameworks have to be mainstreamed for us to attain the Sustainable Development Agenda. So these are some of my thoughts coming from APFSD and reporting live to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sai. Thank you very much. And thank you for mentioning the development justice agenda, which is so very important if we really have to achieve gender equity in the first place. Friends, now Rashidah has tempted me or prompted me to talk a little more about aging. And the first ever historic Intergovernmental Working Group meeting, or IWGW, to protect the rights of older persons was held last week. It is indeed important to recognize upfront that it has taken older persons, with support from not so old ones also, over 2 decades of advocacy and efforts to reach this point where governments are convening to draft a legally binding treaty to age with rights. Finally, after 20 plus years of struggle, the Intergovernmental Working Group, or as I said, IGWG, was created by the UN Human Rights Council last year in April. IGWG was given the mandate to draft international legally binding instrument or a treaty on the human rights of older persons with the objective of promoting, protecting, and ensuring the full enjoyment of human rights by older people. So eventually we have started moving in the right direction in regard to older persons. It was a privilege for me to be registered for this first ever IGWG meeting to draft legally binding UN treaty to protect rights of older persons, not only as a representative from CNS and our co-led campaign, which is Development Justice for Older Persons, but also as a delegate with lived experience. And it is important to me that the UN treaty is being drafted where those with lived experience have a seat on the table. This is an important victory that has taken sustained and persistent advocacy efforts from a lot of us to demand that there is nothing about us without us, and to engage those most unheard or unreached when it comes to older populations too. But this is just the beginning of the fight. We need these safeguards so that this possible new UN treaty is dominantly drafted by those who are most marginalized amongst older people, such as women, women with disabilities, indigenous peoples, then gender diverse peoples, and not by patriarchal, capitalist, religious, and fundamentalist or warmongering older men. I quote the words spoken by Nada al-Nashif, UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, who is a senior citizen herself. While opening the IGWG meet of this UN treaty, she said that meaningful participation is essential. Older persons themselves, in all their diversity, including older women, older persons with disabilities, those belonging to indigenous peoples, minorities, and rural communities, all must be actively engaged in this process. Civil society organizations, national human rights institutions, and independent experts bring indispensable experience, data, and insight. An inclusive and transparent process will strengthen both the legitimacy and the quality of the outcome, quote unquote. Life expectancy, as has been mentioned earlier also, has increased significantly in most settings over the past years. Japan has nearly 100,000 people aged 100 years or older, the highest in the world, with women comprising roughly 88% of this population. In fact, as shared by the Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, for the first time in history, in many regions, the number of persons aged 60 and over exceeds that of children under 5. By 2050, older persons will represent more than 1/5 of the global population. Our society has also advanced in terms of urban and rural infrastructure development over the years, but we have failed to match the pace of population aging and adapt systems, policies, programs, and actions on the ground to meet the unique needs of older persons. We have conveniently forgotten about them while developing our cities. Otherwise, how else can one explain inaccessible public healthcare services for older persons, and other inaccessible public services, including inaccessible public transport. Public services are inaccessible, perhaps because decision makers are not older persons, but those who are insensitive to the needs of older persons, especially to the needs of older women, older people with disabilities, and other indigenous peoples, or of other gender diverse communities. Longevity is one of humanity's greatest achievements, yet the promise of longer life is too often accompanied by persistent gaps in the protection of human rights. We all are aging regardless of age. But while child's rights are increasingly getting protected, young people's rights are protected. Not so young people's rights are protected, and rightly so. Older persons have been on the development blind spot for long. Older people are as diverse as other populations, including in terms of sexual and gender orientations, expectations and identities, sexual and economic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, skills and competencies, diverse and ambitions, aspirations, hopes and dreams. Desires and ambitions, aspirations and hopes and dreams. So we have to keep those marginalized among other persons in the center of the response, which includes older women. I repeat this, older women, older indigenous peoples, older gender diverse persons, and peoples with disabilities. One elephant in the room I find is ageism, which includes harmful norms, stereotypes, narratives, and tropes against older persons. Ageism impacts older women, older gender diverse persons, older indigenous peoples more than others. Age can be no barrier to learning, but ageism is a huge barrier, and so is gender inequality. Unless we do away with age-related harmful stereotypes, social norms, and narratives, we would do huge injustice to older persons. One such stereotype is against our right as older persons to leisure, pleasure, and full enjoyment of our rights with dignity. As girls and women, we grew up fighting against this stereotype too. And as we age, we continue to be saddled with it. Older persons continue to face intersectional stigma and discrimination when it comes to employment, which directly impacts them financially. When older persons have more experience, skills, and competencies and institutional knowledge in many settings, why cannot they age with purpose by continuing to contribute to economy and society? We need to do away with age-related archaic retirement systems. Instead, there must be support systems in place to ensure that older persons can make a choice with dignity and rights if they want to work or not. Access to washrooms, transport, services, etc. are all part of it. Older persons also face barriers in access to healthcare and long-term care, gaps in social protection, exclusion from decision-making, and heightened risk of poverty, violence, neglect, and abuse. When it comes to sexual health, less said, the better. Rashidah had also pointed out to this. Many find it difficult to digest and accept sexual health and rights of all peoples all through their life cycles, which includes older persons too. This becomes even more critically important when it comes to older women with disabilities, older gender diverse peoples, and older indigenous people. No one but me, myself, should control my sexuality or my body. Let all adults choose how they would like to live their lives, irrespective of their age. Bodily autonomy must be guaranteed all through our life cycle. For many older peoples, these challenges are compounded by intersecting forms of stigma as well as intersectional discrimination, including on the basis of gender, disability, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. We are not asking for mercy. We are asking for our long overdue rights. We have to end ageism ageism and gender inequality has to end with us. The establishment of IGWG by the UN Human Rights Council represents a decisive step forward. Its first session has opened a new chapter in a collective effort to address the conceptual and normative gaps in the international human rights framework as it relates to older persons. However, as Nada had rightly remarked, a legally binding instrument will not by itself resolve all the challenges older persons face. Its effectiveness will depend on political will, adequate resources, strong institutions, and sustained societal transformation. But a legally binding treaty can definitely accelerate progress towards preparing all countries for population aging, which is already a growing reality. Or so do I believe. We need to recognize older persons not as burdens, but as rights holders and as vital contributors to families, communities, economies, and public life. And as the UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights has said, dignity and autonomy must remain at the center. Older persons are rights holders entitled to equality before the law, to independent living, to making their own decisions, and to participating fully in society. Let us hope that this possible legally binding UN treaty affirms the agency of older persons and safeguards their autonomy across all areas of life and all through their life cycles. I rest my case here. We now open for questions and comments from our participants. We already have a question for Shiphrah from Noi Srinafa, and also a question for Rashidah from Louisa Hawley. They have answered the questions in the chat box, but as this is being live telecast on YouTube also, this session, I would request them to respond here again. So I'm just calling out Noi Srinafa's question to Shiphrah. She says, if CSW70 agenda has inclusive language for older persons or not, like older women with disabilities, or indigenous peoples, for example. Or when we speak of violence, we need specific interventions to ensure that no older women or gender diverse person face violence. Yes, Shiphrah.
Thanks, Shobha. As I said on the chat,
Yes.
yes, older women are currently named among other groups with specific needs in relation to access to justice. So there's not really like a specific paragraph relating to older women, but they're included at least in a listing of groups that have specific needs. To strengthen kind of the language for older women, we're currently seeking the inclusion of throughout life course in relation to mechanisms to prevent, eliminate, and respond to sexual and gender-based violence. So the focus has been on women of reproductive age, and we forget adolescents in that, and older women and older persons. Thank you.
Thank you. Rashidah, the question for you from Louisa Hawley is that when we speak of UHC and right to health and older persons, if they need support for knee or other issues without which they cannot enjoy full human rights, why can't we offer the services in a rights-based manner? Yes, Rashidah, would you please like to speak out your response? Is Rashidah, are you there?
Yeah.
Yes.
It is now a breaking of fast time for me. So
Okay, sorry.
I have to stop and drink a bit. Yeah, I've done that. Yeah. So I think one of the most important issues in many of these low and middle income countries in particular is about costs of healthcare. All these BTKR, knee replacement, spine replacement, if you fall, hip replacement, for example, or even for cancers and stuff like that, they are all expensive, very expensive. And it is also a burden, of course, on the government, and they have to charge. Insurance is not really, I think, and well, insurance have been trying to penetrate the health system of countries, but I am wary about it, about whether it will really help those who can't afford, unless we create a certain type of insurance system that covers the high cost, uh, of healthcare. The other reason I have, so one is about cost. The other one, which is equally important, even or if not more important, is because I think those policymakers and also those who are trying to operationalize do not really have or really understand the rights framework. So I wonder, like in the early days of ICPD, there was a very aggressive efforts and attempts by several NGOs to try to reach out to various groups of people who are involved in programs and policy of the countries to try to bring in the perspectives. And what does it mean to operationalize the ICPD plus the ICPD? And so, without really fully understanding the rights framework and the gender framework, or do not even want where I am, for example, they may be very reluctant to even accept the word gender. Like I said, there is a tension, like Gita said. There is a tension actually between in the word, in the concept, in the term of SRHR. And so even for gender sometimes in certain places we can't use. So if that is the case, how do you expect the rights and use framework to be brought into the thinking of policies and programs? But I must say that in my country, there are already efforts to special efforts for health for older persons, and I'm glad because I found out that there are also activity centers outside in the community. One under the Department of Welfare, the other one under the Department of Health. And I just think that these two should collaborate and really think about how they can exploit their resources because they are already on the ground. These centers are on the ground with especially targeting older persons for activities. I know they don't have the gender perspective, but that's fine because it is our job as NGOs to go there, but we must have the capacity ourselves and the funding to go and really arrange for that kind of outreach program. So those are the two basic things in my mind. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rashidah. Thank you. And I think we have already crossed our time. So with this, we come to the close of today's session. Our heartfelt thanks to the speakers as well as to the participants for joining us today for these important discussions. And I think we should leave with the resolve to continue our efforts for gender equity and for the rights of older persons to be center stage. Namaste and have a good day.